and I just sense that you are too. I'm starting a new series this morning that I've entitled Home Wrecker. That's some good graphics. You know, Pastor Josh puts these together for us. I really appreciate it. I'm excited about this series that God's laid on my heart. I believe it can and will be life-changing for each and every one of us present. You know, God, I believe, will have something to say to every one of us, whether we're married, single, wanting to be married, or wish that we never married. You know, God has something to say to us in His Word about this relationship called marriage. So before we get into it, I'd like us to kind of get your thoughts on this. So we have a real-time poll that we're going to put up here called Poll Everywhere. Get your smart devices out. So what you want to do is, if you're going to participate in the poll, take your smartphone, your tablet, and put in 22333 in who you would send it to. And then once you put that number 2233, text A life to that, and it will bring up this poll. So are we still trying to connect there, Pastor Josh? Okay. So we won't see the questions on the screen? Okay, yeah, top. Okay, so here you have, what do you think are the top 3 challenges that couples face today? Somebody's texted in. You could do just 3 different words, okay? This person said money, sex, and in-laws is the top thing that he thinks that couples will face today. What do you think? Text it to that. Whether you're married or not married, just go ahead and participate in the poll. Somebody else said the same thing. Oh, money and kids. All right. Job. You can put all 3 in the one answer. Time. Money, sex, time. Money, children, media. Very good. Stress, bills, communication. That's a married person, I think, right there. That was you? Very good. Trust. Purity, money, work. All right, so let's move on to the next question that we have there. Let's put up the next question. What are a few of the false expectations of engaged couples? What are the expectations, perfection, look at that. Fairy tale. No issues, very good. Fairy tale's a theme there, huh? Live as I please. I'm imagining after you're married, you're saying it's a false expectation that you can just do whatever you want. Always get along. Very good. Poll is full and no longer accepting responses. So everything will be easy. You will always agree. A friend of mine once said, if the 2 of you always agree, one of you is not necessary. He will always cuddle and hold your hand. Elka, did you write that? All right, let's go to the next one. Let's take a look at the next question. Which marriages do you think have a better chance of survival? And so you've got marriages that are arranged by parents, etc., is one choice, A. Couples who choose on their own they will marry, B. Or people who find each other online. Somebody changed their mind real quick. I guess they've all decided by now. Anybody else still voting there on that one? We're going to move on to the next one. The last one. And so the last poll we're just asking is, do you think people who have been previously married need premarital coaching? Wow, they're thinking about it and they're cutting it back quick there on the B, huh? So I guess that's it right there, huh? Well, I got to thinking about this, and the title of this message this morning is The Princess and the Frog, when fantasy collides with reality. And so I got to thinking about the fact, this kind of dates me a little bit. I've been in ministry the majority of my life, and the first marriage ceremony that I ever officiated at, I went back and figured it out, was in 1977. Whoa, they said over here. You know how many years ago that was? 40, yeah. 40-some years ago. And, you know, you know what I discovered? You know what I discovered in those 40 years of meeting with couples and working out with them before they get married? I discovered a lot. But one of the things, the main thing that I discovered is most couples don't have any idea what they're getting into when they get married. How many of you are married and would testify to that? Let me see your hand. Yeah. Well, I got to thinking about that there is a fairy tale that was written that really kind of encapsulates that. Let's take a look at The Princess and the Frog.
Wait! I know this story. Che fragi brutto.
The Frog Prince?
Yes. My mother had these servants. Read this to me every night. Yes. So this is exactly the answer. You must kiss me.
Excuse me?
You will enjoy. I guarantee. All women enjoy the kiss of Prince Naveen. Come, we pack her. That's new.
Look, I'm sorry. I'd really like to help you, but I just do not kiss frogs.
Wait a sec, but on the balcony. You asked me.
I didn't expect y'all to answer.
Oh, but you must kiss me. Look, besides being unbelievably handsome, okay, I also happen to come from a fabulously wealthy family. Surely I could offer you some type of reward, a wish I could grant, perhaps? Yes?
Just one kiss.
Just one. Unless you beg for more.
Okay, Tiana, you can do this. You can do this. Just look here. Okay.
Faldonza.
Y'all don't look that much different. But how'd you get way up there? And how'd I get way down here and all this?
When fantasy collides with reality. You know, in thinking about homes and relationships, all kinds of relationships and roles, I got to thinking about that the one fantasy that many people have, and I don't know if it's because of Hollywood or because of stories like The Princess and the Frog, the fairy tales, is that great homes and great marriages and great relationships just happen. They don't. You know, talk about fantasy. You kiss the bride, you kiss the groom, and the frog is still the frog. never changes. And I want you to hear me this morning. Great homes don't just happen. Great homes are built. They're made. You and I make them. So say that with me. Great homes are made. Great homes are made. And it got me to thinking about Jesus talking about serving him and being a disciple and what is needed, what is required to become a disciple. And I want us to kind of superimpose and look at that and see what is needed and necessary to build a great home. Go with me to Luke chapter 14, and let's look at verses 26 through 33. Jesus says in Luke chapter 14, verse 26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. More about that in a moment. Anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and is not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Will he not first sit down and consider whether he is able to build with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming with him with 20,000? If he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. Let's pray together. Father, I ask that you would help me to articulate concisely and clearly to everyone in this house, oh God, how to avoid the wrecking balls that come to destroy our homes and our relationships and our marriages, oh God. I pray in your name that you would not only anoint me, as you have promised, this mantle that you've put upon me to preach, but anoint our ears to hear what you would say to us today. In Jesus' name I pray, and everyone who agrees said. First of all, I want you to note that if we're going to avoid, we're wanting to build. Now, Jesus talked about building a tower. And I'm saying, if you're going to build a marriage, if you're going to build a strong relationship, your marriage that you're in now, or if you plan to get married at any point, you need to avoid and do several things. And so one of the things that you need to do to avoid fantasy crashing in on your reality is you need to realize that when you get married, there will be difficult choices to make. Now, I want to tell you, it's pretty easy to walk down the aisle, isn't it? It's after you walk down the aisle. Now, Jesus said here, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his mother and father, his wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he can't be my disciple. Does Jesus really mean that you need to hate your parents? That you need to hate your children? No. Because as we look at the context of what he is saying and the context of the rest of the word, we know that he says husbands ought to love their wives. We know that he tells wives that they ought to love and respect their husbands. See, God's agreeing this morning. So what Jesus is saying here, compared to your love for me, your love for your father, your love for your mother, your love for your husband or wife, or your children, compared to that, it would seem like hate. What he is saying, you must love me more than them. God first. So I want to tell you that the tough choice that you and I will need to make as a spouse is that we must love our spouse more than anyone or anything except God. God first, and then our spouse. You know, Raymond Hull is credited with stating, all marriages are happy. It's the living together afterwards that can create trouble. And so we know that if we've been married, but we need to understand that before we get married. Marriage isn't easy. Just like being a follower of Jesus Christ, it's very easy to walk forward and accept Christ. The difficulty is, or where the rubber meets the road, is after you accept Jesus, being a disciple and embracing the tough sayings and things that he says. One of them being right here. And I'm saying to us as well, in marriage, it's easy to get married. It's the afterwards that we must be willing to make those tough choices. So in order to avoid the wrecking ball in your marriage and home, you must love your spouse more than your children, more than your parents, more than your siblings. You see, you can't build a successful home if your spouse, other than God, isn't first. I was talking with somebody just after the first service. They sought me out and they wanted to talk to me and wanted some advice. And I was sharing with them that, if you build your home just on your children, at some point your children will leave. Have you found that to be true? They may come back, I understand. They may leave and come back and leave and come back. But at some point, they're going to grow up and they can move away and do whatever they want. So if you are basing your marriage on your children, which is children are a blessing from God. But when they leave and go away, then what basis of a marriage will you have? Your spouse must be first. And then that's the tough choice that's made. That doesn't mean that you don't respect and love your kids. It means that you love your husband or wife more than them. Can I get a witness this morning? The next thing in this tough decision, Jesus says that we must be willing to carry our cross. I want to look at that in our marriage and say, you and I must be willing to lay down our life for our spouse. We must be willing to die for them. That's a tough choice. Let's take a look at this because Jesus teaches us this and shows us this. This video puts it so well. see, to avoid the wrecking ball of fantasy, we must be willing to make difficult decisions. And it's one of those difficult decisions is loving our spouse even when they are unlovable. Because it will happen at some point, some way or another. The next thing that Jesus teaches in this is he's talking about evaluating the cost. He says, evaluate the cost of what you're trying to build. In verse 28, he says, suppose you want to build a tower. I want to look at it from the standpoint, suppose you're wanting to be married. You want to build a marriage. You want to build a strong home. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if it can be finished? Everyone who sees it, if he doesn't, will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. Often when we hear the word cost, we tend to think of money, right? We tend to think of dollars and how much that costs. Very funny story, I think it's funny, was that when Elke and I were engaged, and I want to tell you, we were engaged for 4 years. That's a long engagement. It's probably... Well, I knew I was going to marry you when I first met you, so... Yeah, we were together for about 4.5 years, I guess maybe. But anyway, the whole point is this. The whole point is this, is that at one point, somebody said to me, why haven't you gotten married yet? And I said, well, I'm trying to save up enough money so I can afford to get married. And the guy looked at me and laughed. He said, Everett, you'll never be able to afford to get married. Just go ahead and get married, you know? But the cost I'm talking about here this morning isn't as much the money, and money is very important. Because, by the way, have you ever heard the phrase, two can live as cheap as what? One? You ever heard that? That's a false expectation. You know, two can live as cheap as one. I came to find out that the late W.A. Criswell, who pastored First Baptist in Dallas, once said in regard to this, two can live as cheaply as one, only as long as one doesn't eat and the other doesn't buy any clothes. Fantasy, a wrecking ball. You know, we must evaluate the cost. It will be a costly endeavor, you know. The second fantasy that I want us to think about here in evaluating the cost is romantic love is enough to build a strong marriage. People think that, you know. They see the Hollywood movies. They see the videos, and they see all of this stuff. And as a matter of fact, sometimes they even see people at church, and they think that there's no struggles in that person's home or in that person's marriage, or they don't have any financial difficulties. And they think, wow, you know, life is... And you don't see what's going on after you walk out. You see, all marriage relationships go through phases. And the first phase that almost every marriage goes through is the romantic phase. And you know, studies of marriages have come to discover that that will last somewhere along the average of about 5 years, the romantic stage of marriage. And then right after that, the next stage that people come into somewhere around the 5-year mark, it could be 3 for some and it could be 6 for others, but the average is about 5, is then you move into the disillusionment phase. I would get a witness this morning, but I don't want to get you in trouble. You know, disillusionment phase, it's characterized by this. Things you thought were cute in the past are now annoying. You know? Or the qualities that you previously valued, like organization, it might become nitpicking. Why does it have to be like that? You know? Or differences now in this disillusionment phase, they now become magnified. And so, you know, we begin to go through the phase of romance, and then we get into disillusionment. And that is one of the things that we must evaluate the cost, that at some point we are probably going to be annoyed, or we're going to see different things as just so frustrating and nitpicking. One other thing that we want to look at, you could probably finish this false expectation, is love never means having to say yeah. Really? Can anyone really think that that's true today? There was a movie, right, that postulated that whole idea that love never means having to say you're sorry. People at times say mean things. Or sometimes without even meaning it, they say something in a hurtful way. I did that last night at my house. I'm preaching to me. You know, good people at times do things that turn out bad, and statements and behavior are sometimes misunderstood. Sincere apologies and forgiveness are crucial in healing any damage done in a relationship. And so evaluate the cost. Understand that there's going to need to be some adjustments made. Did you notice that in this text, in evaluating the cost, he talked about be ready to make peace, verse 32. He will send a delegation while the other is a long way off and asks for terms of peace. Never forget that in marriage, if either of you is bent on winning, both of you end up losing. That's tweetable. Let me say that again. If either of you in marriage is bent on winning in regard with that spouse, both of you will end up losing. Count the cost. Evaluate the cost, Jesus said. And if we do that, we will avoid the wrecking ball of fantasy colliding with our reality. Thirdly, I see Jesus saying to us, if we're going to avoid a home wrecking ball, I will need to adjust. And that's kind of a theme through this whole message, isn't it? I will need to adjust my expectations to life's reality. You know, he says, there's a king that's about to go to war with another king. Will he not first sit down, consider if he's able with 10,000 men? The reality is that your home and your marriage has an enemy. Adjust to that reality. There is a king, small k, who has a kingdom that is raging and is at war with God's idea and God's plan for marriage. And so every one of us, whether we're married or whether someday we want to be married, we need to understand the gravity of the fact that Satan is fighting against marriage. And you can see the casualties daily in our society. So what do we need to do to avoid this wrecking ball and understand the gravity? It means, first of all, the reality is we are building marriages in a fallen world. Do you hear that? It's a fallen world. What does that mean? It means that you and I are going to have to fight an enemy who is warring against our home and mate. It means that you and your spouse will face temptations of all sorts. Another person, another idea, all kinds of temptations and problems will fight against us. And you and your spouse need to expect that battle is going to take place and build defenses against his attacks. I want to congratulate you because by being in church today, you're saying that the Word of God and the principles of God are what I want to build my life on. That's the place to start. Build your life on what God says in His Word and follow the principles in His Word to come against the attack of the enemy in your home and in your marriage. Secondly, the reality is we who get married know, this is the reality we need to adjust to. We know we are marrying a sinner. You know, you might have thought as you walked up the aisle and you had the bride, she came down the aisle and she stood in front of you, that she floated down the aisle and that she is a saint. The guy or the gal that we marry is a flawed human being, fallen and sinful, and it will eventually manifest itself. It'll eventually show up at our house that we have all sinned and fall short of the expectations of our spouse. Amen? And so we are going to adjust to that reality. And, you know, if you don't, they will eventually annoy you and offend you and hurt you in some way. And if you don't adjust to that, you will be crushed. But here's the good news. The bad news is that you can be crushed, but the good news is, the good reality that we should adjust to is that we can, as believers, expect that God is for our marriage. Let's think about this for a moment. Before God had a church, He had a family. Before God instituted the church, there was a man and wife. Jesus said from the very beginning, God meant for one husband and one wife. That was God's idea. Marriage is God's idea. And if it's God's idea, we can expect that if God is for marriage, He is for my marriage, and that if I align myself with Him and His Word, He will give me power and help to overcome any battle that I face. As long as the two of us look to God, we can expect the power of God to help us through any valley. Come on, give Him thanks and praise today. I want you to understand that the final reality that we have to adjust to as we look at adjusting to life's expectations is that we should never expect our spouse to be responsible for our happiness. What do you mean, Pastor? Let me share this with you. Do you know that marriage seldom makes anybody happy? You know, what marriage does is it tends to intensify the state in which it finds us. And the truth of the matter is, God has not made any person in your life or in my life responsible for my happiness. There's only one person, there's only one being that can make us happy, and that is God. As you read through the scriptures, you will find over and over again, especially in the Psalms and the Proverbs, that it talks about happy is the man, or blessed is the man, whose God is the Lord. And so it's God's responsibility. And as I find my place in God and walk with God, He is the one that gives me great joy and great happiness. And it just takes and multiplies the happiness and the joy that a husband and a wife find together. But the first place to find happiness and joy, the responsibility is God. God has been wise in making only Him the source of our happiness. Flawed human beings will disappoint us. Proverbs 16:20 tells us that whoever trusts in the Lord, happy is he. Finally, as I close, I want you to realize that Jesus says, if you want to build a tower or you want to see great success, you've got to be willing to sacrifice for the greater. If you're not willing to give up everything, then you can't be His disciple. If you're not willing to give up everything for that husband or wife, be willing to sacrifice, you're not going to build a strong marriage. Sacrifice is essential in success in marriage. And you must be willing to give more than you think you have at times. Have you ever heard the phrase, marriage is a 50-50 what? Proposition. Is that true? No. It's 100%. It's not just 50 from you and 50 from him or her. It's 100% from you and 100% from him or her. And the truth of the matter is there are times where you're going to have to go even beyond what you thought you had. Be willing willing to give up everything.